guest, Dr. Sabrina Pasterski. She's a theoretical physicist and an advocate for women in STEM. She's been fascinated by aerospace engineering and even built an aircraft when she was a teenager. She attended MIT and Harvard and has contributed massively to the physics field, including the discovery of the spin, memory, and effect. I think it's safe to say she's a genius. I like to welcome her.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It's an incredible honour to meet you and speak to you and for you to be here. I hope you've had a lovely time in Cambridge. I was just wondering if you could start off by asking, just tell us about yourself and your work. Just whatever.
Sure. So I'm a high-energy theoretical physicist, which high energy refers to the fact that we study physics at very short distance scales. And so the program of research that I'm working on is basically trying to apply kind of what we've distilled from what we think the very short distance description is, which is string theory, to something more practical and understand how to encode scattering as we see it either at CERN or gravitational waves coming into LIGO in a consistent framework that actually has this holographic principle. So I can go into more details of that, but at some point it probably just would get too abstract. And we can also appreciate a little bit of how fun it is to really think about the layers of abstraction in the ideas that we study. So.
That's incredible. And obviously, most educated person I've ever met and spoken to and heard of. And you've achieved a lot, I think it's safe to say, in your whole career. You made onto the Forbes 30 and the 30 list, various awards, various honours. But what to you has been your proudest achievement to date?
I mean, I think the fact that there's a disconnect between the way that maybe the public sees science or people in science and kind of the hype that you can get because of a good story with the aerospace engineering background, and then actually getting a faculty job. So I was just very happy that I didn't ruin things before and that I'm actually faculty. Yeah.
And just you just mentioned aerospace engineering and your experiences building aircraft. How was that as a teenager to just build your own aircraft and then everything that's followed along from that?
So I think it's a funny story. Basically, when I was little, I at some point was interested in aerospace engineering, and more the role models were I guess at the time it was Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos had these private aerospace companies. And so it was a combination of being inspired by those people and then a really kind of out there attempt by my family and myself to try to get into MIT for undergrad, and these hyper competitive undergraduate admissions. So it's what can you do to really stand out? And one thing you can do is I guess you can start taking flying lessons at any age. So I was 9 at the time. But then at some point you're just learning how to fly, and it's whatever. Would go to these air shows like Oshkosh Air Venture, and you'd meet people who were putting together kit planes. And so one high school teacher was saying, well, this won't help you get into high school because at some point the only thing that you've done is something that everybody else could do but younger. And so he kind of challenged me and decided to start building this kit plane. So there's that. And then at some point though, you kind of I was sending these video clips of putting together this aircraft kit to people at the War or whatnot to try to get their attention, and it works because you're young, you're doing something that's kind of weird, but at some level you're really trying to just build this story, and at some point you've built this long story arc, and the question is, what are you going to do with it? And so for a while I didn't know what I would do with it, and I kind of switched over to physics at some point and was surprised, I guess, that right as I was entering graduate school, that story kind of popped up again, and that's how I got this hype in physics somehow. And so it was interesting just how the story that I intentionally had tried to build to get into undergrad, it didn't even work because I got waitlisted, and then I had to really push to get into this undergrad, comes back and either bites you or helps you depending on how you view it. And so the fun thing now is to try to see what can I use from that for things that I care about now within my field.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I feel it's certainly a way to get someone's attention is to build an airplane and fly it as well, especially at such a young age. Obviously that's quite a scary thing, and I've watched a few of your interviews. I watched as it was happening. And And your mum said that she was quite worried.
Yeah.
Do you feel like having that supportive background from your family, like with them taking you to air shows, has been like
Yeah.
fundamental in?
I mean, it was fundamental to that narrative, but to whatever extent, it was interesting. Like as an adult, I think that I'm more surprised at the things that I did as far as like not being scared. Like there's a level of trust. It's like when you're putting something together and then your dad is overseeing, like over your shoulder, looking at what you're doing, and it's fine. You're like, oh, this is great. And then at some point, you're an adult and you realize the limitations to your parents' like, expertise, and you're like, oh my god, what did I get in? And so it's definitely eye-opening, but also interesting just what you can do when you kind of put your mind to it and you don't see, I guess, like it's a straightforward thing, and so if something's straightforward that you can do, you can just run and finish that thing. And research is very different from that, and so it's interesting to kind of always reflect that as soon as you can find a problem that actually is straightforward, you can just run for it and try to bring that back. I think is something valuable that I appreciate. But yeah.
I mean, it's like incredible. Like it's just fascinating to hear just like the educational journey from such a young age.
Yeah.
Doing all these innovative things. And I think when you started so young in this like incredible journey, it's only like fair to come on to how that led you to like the physics and that journey. So how would you say your experience equipped you for like physics? Do you think like it was influential in this decision?
So, I mean, I think that the aerospace engineering side of it had two effects. So one was that I was at the STEM school, and the founder of my high school was really interested in like physics first. He was he used to be a director of Fermilab, so he had this Nobel Prize in physics. And he would have like lunches with the laureates and basically try to encourage people to go into physics. And so I think having that mentor made that more of a possibility, or like that an idea. Also, most of the students at my school wanted a PhD, so it's a different like background where suddenly like academia has some value. And then besides that, like the people that I really admired who were running these aerospace companies, they were doing this as like their like side like project now that they had like wealth from other ventures, and yet they somehow admired physics, and I didn't understand why they did. Like you could see this like Milner Prize, like these breakthrough prizes are funded by these people who have other wealth that they want to like make. Why do they care about making scientists famous or what? I don't know their motivation, but like, a lot of those first breakthrough prizes went to people in like string theory. So I think part of like the fact that the people that I admired these like theoretical physicists pushed me in a direction of a field where I didn't really understand what I was getting into. So it's really funny. It's like definitely aerospace engineering led me into physics, but like unclear like that was a good thing or why like that actually made sense. And so it's super funny because like sometimes in physics you run into like, well, what have you done lately as far as these like fields can become a little bit relatively stagnant as far as like when are breakthroughs happening. Like the last like a computation or result that like led to a Nobel Prize would be like a result from 50 years ago and 25 years ago for these breakthrough prizes roughly in like my niche type field. And so then like compared to say aerospace engineering, I found like most people were doing like building quadcopters, and you'd seen this like rapid like acceleration of progress from like the Wright brothers to then people flying commercially around the world. But now we're scared to go to the moon with people or whatnot. And so it's kind of funny how it's like I felt aerospace engineering was at the level now where it's just like don't mess things up, keep going. And so for me, physics was a much like more recent set of new revolutions in some sense. So
no, incredible, and especially with like the theoretical element of physics. So you joined the Parameter Institute when you were 27.
I probably got the job offer around then, but I mean, I've since then a couple of years have passed, so I'm 30 now. But it's super nice to be able to have like an academic job. It's like it's funny how different it changes when you have like your whole life in front of you, or at least until tenure track clock, maybe you have to be worried, to do research versus when it's like 3 years or however long your PhD is to really make it or break it and make an impact. And so also like the resources available to you become very like different. Suddenly it's more also about the team that you're building instead of just your individual work product. And so, I'm lucky that I've had a faculty job for enough time that I can really appreciate the difference. Yeah.
So obviously with the Parameter Institute, it has like theoretical physics at its core.
It is just that.
Yeah.
And that's really cool, right? So the fun thing about when you're doing something that is very abstract, oftentimes even like the engineering friends, when they were saying that I wanted to go into theoretical physics, they're like, why would you do that? Like it's not practical. And so like their value, like the metric is coming from like how practical something is. And I can get to later why I still think there are practical things that can come out of the work, like even though it's going to be a deflection. But theoretical physics being like the front and center, the only purpose of a research institute, not only like is great that they have jobs then for theoretical physicists, but also creates an environment where like the whole AV team, everything that's set up to do your work better is now a priority. So like at Harvard, my advisor can be this like really say famous theoretical physicist, but he's not top dog at that university. his part of the department isn't even the top like focus of that department. And so it's weird how suddenly like the resources that are much greater at, say, Harvard are not really like for just your work. And so it's super cool, and there's different questions you can try to answer when you're at a place that is just for your field, especially when it's so niche. Yeah.
So do you see that theoretical physics will become the future of physics?
So I think that there's a thread of, that theoretical physics is that gives it this longevity, and that's what I liked about like really formal theory, as compared to other branches of physics that naturally should either become their own fields or merge into other engineering disciplines. And so to me, like part of the value of that institute is like it's one of the few places that really is supporting something that I think has a very long legacy, and that somehow what people conflate with when they say that they study physics. It's like the kind of like the why are we here type questions in a more like a quantitative way. And so I think there's a staying power to that brand that is really cool and really something to try to support. But I'm not saying the future. I'm sure that there will be other future. Like there's already like quantum engineering departments that are like whole new departments just for part of it. It's like no, keep some of the value there in your physics department so you have funding. But yeah.
So you were saying just briefly before about how you found that people attach value to practicality.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fair judgment to make on something's value by how practical it can be?
So I think that any judgment can be fair for like the reasons that they're starting from. But I think that one thing that people don't keep in mind is like somehow like, so one thing when you're in a field where suddenly everybody's asking you like, what's the value of this, what's the value of this, you can either become like delusional or jaded. Right? So one actually would be like, if what I'm doing is valuable, then I can find a reason why everything else that you're doing isn't valuable. Right? And so it's very easy to try to see like, well, under what conditions would you say this isn't valuable? It's like what time scales do you value things? So I could say like this legacy that we're part of is super long, and that staying power, being able to add to that has immense value. But I think even for the practical level, there's a question of like how would an experimentalist motivate their experiment to be funded? And there's two things. One thing could be we're really going to measure this thing and we're going to change our understanding of the universe. And I'd say that value is still there in the formal pure theory part. But then there's another way that it's often like pitched, which is that the technology you would need to make this experiment work is going to have other more practical applications. And I think that's also something that theoretical physics has that we don't really ever think about. And this is also something that you would never think about when you're at a department at a larger university, because sometimes those tools are not from your own field. So the aerospace engineering example, maybe it's going to be better power plants or like different like related components that are going to have improvements that are going to then revolutionize your field. And as Boeing, you would care about that. But as a Core 16 person, you might not. So in our field, whether it's like better semantic search is going to come out of like progress in AI, that's something that a theoretical physics institute can care about and be a part of trying to make sure that research is done better and like how would we make it more effective. But maybe a department in a university would just say, let the ML people do that. Right?
So I feel like a few of us in the room might not be scientists, including myself.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could explain to us more like theoretical physical concepts, such as like celestial holography. Like, what does that mean for us? Because I know that's quite a big thing.
Okay. So what the Simon's collaboration that we're working on is titled celestial holography. And I try to give two versions of the definition. So the definition that I use in like the introductions or abstracts for like a paper would be that we're positing that quantum gravity in four-dimensional asymptotically flat spacetimes is encoded in this two-dimensional celestial sphere, and we're trying to build up the like symmetries of that hologram and consistent boundary description of our theory. But the practical thing is basically that we want to have a consistent framework that describes very low energy physics, so large distance scales, very short distance physics. We know at short distances there's quantum mechanics, long distances there's gravity, whether it's not Newtonian but like general relativity. And you want one framework that can capture both. And so in studying quantum gravity, people have found that whether you're thinking at like abstract like thought experiments about what's happening near a black hole and its evaporation, or going all the way to like finding a consistent theory that doesn't have certain like short distance problems and saying there's a string theory, both of those guys tell you that quantum gravity should be holographic. And so we're using this, the abstract thing is that we want to have a framework that's simpler, that describes different limits of things that we've probed, and that also imports into it knowledge that we've distilled from other like things that we've built up. And so for me, part of the value of celestial holography isn't so much that, okay, it's trying to be more realistic, our space-times don't have like this negative cosmological constant, like these ADS-CFT examples, but it's also the fact that we're connecting different disciplines. So at a very short scale, the reason why we have this collaboration is because we have people who are doing like twisted holography and twisters and like soft limits of amplitudes coming together to solve the same problem. And so that interdisciplinarity is neat because it's like it's the same problem solved by different things, and it actually is very natural in this context because we're coming across the same symmetry groups. But I think if you scale that back and you say, okay, so what's the value of really being able to bridge together different things? At a very large scale, that's like basically the problem that we run into in fundamental physics. If you're not building a hypothesis that you're going to test with some experiment, you can't kill that idea. So the only way that you can kill ideas is basically, can you say whether or not they're self-consistent with each other? And you can build a bunch of self-consistent frameworks. And so by basically being able to appreciate that there is kind of a language problem in various like specific disciplines, and celestial holography is trying to solve a little bit of that at a very short time scale of what people have been doing in the last like couple decades. You can scale that up to being like, can we have a better organization of this knowledge canon that we're building up on, because we're going to have that problem more and more when we start adding new statements to our theories, right?
I like the scientific approach itself as you test it to make sure it works, and that's why like they're partly called theories, because you can't, until new evidence comes along, you can't prove it that it's the truth.
In some sense, yes, but the thing is like purely theoretical physics and somehow a little bit more like mathematics. It's like mathematics guided by this intuition in some sense of, different senses of self-consistency. So I think that you can still add to those theories before you make these experimental predictions, and you can also rule out, I guess, different subsets of those theories being self-consistent, even without the experimental verification. So you're at that level. And then the question is also, experimental verifications are really only of like some aspect of the theory, so it's an effective model for something. And so I think just there's some value to really appreciating the fact that the uselessness in some sense, or that level of abstraction, is itself a problem that is the one that we deal with all the time.
My mind just keeps getting blown and blown by like everything you're saying, because it just doesn't occur to me as a historian that like the realm of science. So when I hear you speak about science, I'm just taken aback, and I'm sure there's many of us in the audience who are like, this is incredible stuff. And I know you've heard various like labels such as the new Einstein. How does that label make you feel?
So it was scary to me because first of all, it's not true, but it's interesting to me how like the sense of like, what is the weight of that? Like, I don't understand to what extent like the attention that I used to get was because people being like actually believing it, or just thinking this is what we say when we want to say somebody's going to be a good theoretical physicist, or because it's like, why are you saying this? I'm going to fight about it, and then suddenly there's attention in like whatever the algorithm is promoting it. So for me, for the longest time, I was like, how do I use whatever connections that happen to come from these, like whatever hype can be a good thing sometimes. For good, I never thought I would, but it's like it's hard to turn down certain opportunities, and so to whatever extent I used to. Like not this stage, but other stages like that. It's like, you know, you didn't deserve this stage, but you have it, and will that help you down the line? And I'd have colleagues who would say like, no, it won't, because the thing is like physics is done by people, right? And so in some sense, you have a very small set of like maybe 2,000 or so people whose opinions of you really matter, and it's like you can get all this hype that you want, but unless you can get funding for those 2,000 people, like it's like counterproductive, right? Because suddenly you have a reputation you haven't lived up to or whatnot. So I always thought that one day hopefully it just like fades out. I think like pandemic and everybody going inside, I mean these things are very short-lived little like social media things, so it was gone, which is good. But I think that hopefully there's a way to try to use that to some extent. So it's like, I think the thing that I've appreciated after getting a faculty job, and especially because suddenly you're not competing, it's not a zero-sum game for those jobs, is that there's a small community of people who we really work for. Like I work for the Perimeter Institute, but I also work for like high energy theory or like string theory as a community. And in some sense, we collectively are that Einstein. Like, and I totally believe that. Like our research is when you think of Einstein, you should think of like fundamental string theory, like an adjacent, like very pure theoretical research. And so to what extent that brand isn't something that we control, but randomly somebody who will say, like, let's promote women in science, let's pick this girl, she has this aerospace engineering background, that's really cool, so she must be good when she goes to physics, right? As that example, it's like, first of all, we obviously can't control that brand, but we also can't capitalize it in a way where it turns into, like, people who maybe don't want to go the fully formal theory route. Well, then, like, you get into these, like, wars on either YouTube or via, like, popular science books about what the right theory is, but the whole thing is like it's not necessarily a zero-sum game. It's like we all, if there is a problem with the fact that it's getting too abstract, then can you see that as a good thing? Can you see that as like this is the problem that we solve and this is why we have value? Because we're solving things, we're trying to understand basically many layers of abstraction, and that's a problem that you normally don't run into in your daily life. and then also like string theory at some point.
So just touching on your experience,
Yeah.
obviously you're a big advocate for women in STEM.
Yeah.
How has your personal experience as a woman in such a male-dominated field been?
Yeah, so I think the problem is it's a little bit anecdotal. So like I want to be careful not to use my own experience and project it, because part of like the biggest problem that I would run into, I would have like the noticeable one was that is coming from the way that you get promoted or whatnot. So for example, like I know that if I were just a guy, I would not have had some of the opportunities that I had. I think not in my field. So this is not people in the field, but really the external like attention in some sense for like especially that aerospace stuff. So like to whatever extent you put like some sort of prize at like being like this top girl in STEM, you're kind of driving like I guess more people into the field, which can be good, but it's not necessarily coming from the change that's happening in the field that makes it a better thing to do. So I used to resent more the fact that like just the kind of the perception of like being overhyped, and then how that then got translated into like a much more negative thing in my field, and the dynamics that created, rather than something where I felt like many of my colleagues were like actually like biased against me. So I mean, I felt like I couldn't decouple the bias that they had, because I literally like there was a reason to be like no from something that was gender specific. But I do think that like the statistics speak for themselves as far as like our field is, I'd say like 10 to 15% in like formal theory, and it's like whatever 20 to 25% in physics, more like for the undergrad and the PhD level. And like that says something, right, about whether or not like conditions are such. And the question is that I think that I was raised from a family that was more like, if you like lead by example, so try to be good at the job. But that's not clearly like the only solution in some sense. And so what I like is now being in a position of more power as a faculty member, so you suddenly can care about these things. To what extent? By building up more infrastructure around like cross-sectioning academia by discipline, so supporting like high energy theorists everywhere, you can start caring about the pipeline. And so I'm excited for that. But
just on that, what do you think should be done to rectify that imbalance, the gender imbalance in STEM? Do you think it should be like a top-down approach that the government implements, or like a bottom-up approach?
I think I'm scared because the thing is that the different approaches are affecting things at different timescales. And so I think what happens is when you like the worst thing is to feel like you got a job that you didn't deserve. And there's a combination of that. So at first I think I was more insulted by before I got the job than after I got the job. I was like, well, the opportunities that come with it are great. So like before I got the job, it was definitely like, oh my God, like are some of my male colleagues not going to want to work with me, because if we both write the same paper, and then like there's a slight bias towards like equal people, like the girl gets hired, like they're going to suddenly see me as competition and not work with me, so it makes it harder to work with people. Now as soon as you have a faculty job, you can hire them, so it's a lot easier to work with. And so then you can kind of see the other argument, which is I have this job now, you have more opportunities, and so you can succeed in a way that like as you get the benefit of the doubt too. It's strange how people suddenly like you're more likely to be right, even though like nothing changed before or after that job. So I can see there's a short-term benefit of it. I think I still wish that like tenure or like at like the top level of like the assessment of your quality of your work was gender like blind. But I think the thing is that the one thing that you should do is just figure out what people do or don't enjoy about their jobs, and see if there's something you can change there, because driving something isn't going to be as effective as just making the conditions for people to want to be in that job or thrive in that job, and then not judging them if it's for different reasons, or trying to pressure people who would otherwise not, because like they want more women in a given field, for example. Yeah.
Amazing. If it's okay with you, is it okay we take some questions from the audience?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If anyone has any questions? Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions. The first of them is context. I'm doing a PhD in astrophysics at the moment.
Awesome.
Last year I was doing a master's in theoretical physics.
Okay.
And a couple of times talking to theoretical physics professors, they told me that something that was hard for them in their field,
Yeah.
and we're talking about one string theorist and one theoretical cosmologist, was how their work would probably not have experimental verification for decades, if not centuries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the reason why they suggested to me to think very hard about applying to PhDs in physical physics.
Yeah.
While on the other hand, astrophysics is more short. So I was wondering how you deal with that fact.
Yeah. I mean, so I think I deal with it. I mean, so the thing is, you should do whatever you like enough to be focused enough to do that work. And so whatever motivates you, don't let other people shame you for it or not. So like I do value practicality, and that's to the detriment of my like satisfaction with just the research that I do. But I do still see the fact that it's so abstract. Like, basically, the neat thing about formal theory is that, like, the kind of questions, like, that you're trying to maybe accelerate solving are more on, like, semantic search rather than just dealing with lots of data. And so I think it's fun that then you can appreciate there's this niche that, because everybody else in your field really just likes pen and paper, maybe Mathematica, someone who has a little bit more drive to, like, see if there's something practical can then stand out in a fun way. So it's like, how can I add value to this group of people I now care about because I've, whatever, drank the Kool-Aid to the extent where I've, like, gone through trying to learn the same knowledge canon. And so I think that it's a valid concern, and if you're going to be motivated by practicality, like by like literally experimental verification of your theory, then it's a good advice to go into something with more data coming in.
Even though you're wrong, I think that's...
No, but you can do, I mean, I think the thing is that there is a level of right or wrong or self-consistency that we do deal with. But the problem is sometimes it's like it's a bit of a like a data overload as far as like you never really learn like loop quantum gravity and string theory. You pick one, and so the question is, did you go on the wrong branch?
Yeah.
I'm excited more for like in the short time, is there going to be rapid progress in I guess seeing the bigger picture, forest through the trees, kind of more of a data science applied to like our literature canon. So I think that there can be some exciting stuff coming now that wouldn't have been possible for like my advisor's generation, and that is what makes me excited about my field now.
If I may say
Yeah, absolutely.
Something you touched on multiple times is the role of maths
Yes.
in theory, especially formal.
Exactly.
So that's something I wanted to ask you more about, because something I realized, so I did undergrad astrophysics, and last year I was doing masters in theoretical physics, official school and mathematics.
Yeah.
And something I realized is how maths is not only a tool we use to describe physics, but also a tool we use to understand physics.
Yeah.
And so I was curious about your view on this interplay between maths and physics, and if there is even a remote possibility that we are wrong in using maths, because that's something, there's one grand assumption underlying all our work on physics, and that is that maths actually describes our world. If you ever thought about that, I don't know if you
So I have thoughts on it. I think I'm still going to be a believer in the maths, but I think it's because, again, we're building effective frameworks. And so, like, I think some people might literally, like, take their, like, interpretation of quantum mechanics very literally. I think I'm more along the sides of, like, everything we're studying is probably an effective description. Now, I think there's two ways that math comes into this. The one is, like, what you're saying when you're, like, there's a math problem that describes a physics question. But I think that one thing cool about physics is it gives you a purpose for your math. And then also, I'll get back to dualities and interplaying, like where it tells you something about math. And so, like, I think pure mathematics actually is probably like better. Like the gender bias is slightly like lower, which is great. But also, personally, just maybe as someone who is like interested in physics or coming from that, the thing that I see as like a downside of math is that these like fields that are created, you're adding true statements to them, but like they're a little bit disjoint. And so, physics is a fun way of bridging different fields in mathematics. The problem is you don't have that depth or maybe that familiarity that you need to really like come up with like I don't know, enough to like be able to prove something or be a mathematician. But it's interesting that basically sometimes frameworks in physics, like this ADS-CFT duality, can relate different mathematical, like I guess, subfields in some sense. And so there's an intuition that comes from this self-consistent story that I think is beautifully interplays with math. And mathematics is a language, and it's these different mathematical like subjects are different languages in some sense. And physics is itself a language, and I think even you could say like loop quantum gravity or string theory or more fine-grained like the Bootstrap program and the Amplitudes program, they have different ideas that they've built up. And some of those ideas, like every time that there's like a breakthrough or whatnot, is like sometimes you have a new idea that can explain both, or sometimes you realize that someone else is saying the same thing as you, but you didn't understand that language. And so we have a bit of a translation problem, but the thing about physics is I think we're trying to basically reduce it. And I don't know how much like different mathematical disciplines also care about, I guess, like redundancies in that canon.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question here. I just read your bio. You said you were doing the Snapshot hologram, and also part of the gravitational wave.
Yes.
So have you ever I have three things I want to ask. Have you ever encountered anti-gravity, torsion field, and zero energy? Because like something like free energy devices or free energy theory that can really revolutionize everything about from the aerospace engineering for propulsion or alternative energy propulsion system?
So no for the first one, the anti-gravity, no, because it's built into the spin 2 field the way that we construct it. Like there can be like Casimir energies or whatnot, like we care more about the Hilbert space having energy bounded from below. But see, that's a funny thing. Is like basically you have this establishment canon of knowledge that's built up, and then you have alternative theories. And there's really it's not that I want to be able to just say, no, I know you're wrong, because I don't know the best way to explain either, or actually understand why a given theory is wrong. But you really, you have disconnected components of the canon in some sense when you have it. And to me, it's fascinating to just think about that, appreciate that, right? Which is why is it that, I can't efficiently tell you, or vice versa, how to kill a given theory, except for we know that our frameworks preclude it, right? And so I basically would try to avoid the question of besides just telling you no, but turn it into the positive thing is precisely because there are so many things that even within our own field that we don't know how to say why we don't believe in loop quantum gravity, that's a possible that's a thing, that's a cool thing that we can try to make better. So I would say yeah.
Thank you. On Thursday, one of our emergency debates that we're having for debaters, this House believes that Oppenheimer did nothing wrong. So first of all, it'd be great to have your thoughts, on sort of that day, but also on sort of from your own personal experience, when you're sort of doing this groundbreaking work, how much does sort of your own moral conscience come in when you work on these crazy projects? You ever think about, I don't know, how many working will be used in the future, or companies that you're thinking about working with Boeing, how does that sort of come in your daily life, basically?
Could be fun. So when they say the House disagree, so I'm curious, the format of your debates is that there actually is a stance that one side is taking, or both are equally.
Proposition will go first, and then opposition, and then keep going and fun. Unspoken.
Yeah, I mean, I think the funny thing about watching the Oppenheimer movie, I don't know how accurate or that was the sense in which it was conveyed in that movie that it was inevitable that one side would develop something, and so to me, the thing that I dislike from that is to what extent governments are getting scientists to do things that maybe are wrong, and I would say that it is dangerous and that shouldn't, I don't like arms races at all. I think to me that's the scariest thing, because the motivation for an arms race is that I need to develop this, otherwise someone else will. And if you had, I mean, the alternative might be a Big Brother type state where that's not good either. But it's a scary thing to basically be building something dangerous just because someone else might build it, and then it doesn't work because suddenly the things that you've built can get in the wrong hands because some bad player can sell it on the black market, and you're literally then building your own competition. And so it's a great way to motivate funding your defense contracts. But how is it? And the thing that I also hate the most, which maybe is something that you can't control, is to what extent the people who have the power to use these tools don't understand them. And so if you maybe then I don't know how far you want to extend this, if you're a good chemist, can you make drugs? I don't know, but to what extent are you legislating or mandating someone build something and then these politicians can decide to hand over the keys to different institutions or other countries that they're trying to make peace with as a gesture? And it's first of all, they couldn't have built it themselves, but these scientists could. So to what extent would you have, why is the power in the hands of the people who fund these scientists instead of in the scientists themselves, that they're really creating something clearly of value? My impression is the people who built these things wouldn't, probably necessarily all agree on their use of them, right? And so I wish for the future that, I think it won't be necessarily governments, but companies, right? To me, it bothered me so much that we have to fight for funding or beg for funding based on saying that fundamental physics is going to come up with something that's practical at some point in the future. A lot of times when people pitch theoretical physics, they still point to examples of, say, whether general relativity is helping make clocks precise enough to help with GPS or whatnot. So it's always saying that there will be some practical application, but I don't know what it is. It'll be in the future. And how long are they supposed to believe that? I think part of the reason why they believe that is because we've already done good for the government via Manhattan Project type stuff, where suddenly, okay, you're still paying these little smart kids computing things. But I don't like when you see like private companies basically either investing, like especially when they're not even in the domain of expertise, in say quantum computing, just to show that they can put their foot in it. So to what extent, when you have private companies have research arms that are not in their domain, and they're doing it not necessarily to really be leaders in it, but more so to just act like they are at the cutting edge of everything in some sense, or they're basically hedging whatever technological development so that they have some IP in that space. And it's like, at some level, like the fact that that company is using that to bump their stock price up, they're getting some value, like or money that could be funding research. And so I think it's weird, even though I mean you can't tell anybody not to do it, but I wish that there were more structures where really like the value that's in that field or that field creates can help fund that field going forward. So to what extent like things are much longer time scale than like a patent, but you know, the field that I'm in at some point develop the things that are going to be underlying quantum computing. And if that becomes a big thing, how come the fact that we've added value there can't translate into our field having some funding for like the crazy blue sky stuff that we do our day to day? And so, as much as I can complain about that, I think the practical solution is just, can we try to set up something where when there are these like tech people who really love physics, like, and they want to donate, they're not just creating some institute that's going to compete with other institutes to hire people away or whatnot, but we can set up like maybe pools of funding that are really supporting researchers doing the same thing everywhere. So, like, I think there's some infrastructure that doesn't exist just by the artifact of the university system being the precedent, that are more possible now because everybody can work remotely, that both kind of keep some control over the funding out of the hands of like whatever the interests are of like private companies trying to gobble up IP and make it suddenly less open science. And also maybe would have, at least you'd have some sort of more like power to do the right thing, but maybe that's more relevant for other fields than I think my own field. Yeah. You can go for it. It's your talk.
I had a question about like the barriers to entry in theoretical physics. I feel like if you go through a regular undergrad and it's something like through a PhD, like it might prepare you for some particular problem, but I feel like relying on like an underground background is or an undergrad background and like maybe a little bit further grad background as soon as you like step a little bit out. Like how do you every avenue you go down in theoretical physics is so deep and complex and abstract and like it's been worked on and developed for so long. Like how do you like personally or how do people I don't know, have enough knowledge outside of this examination almost, and how do they like keep that up, or how do they first develop that?
No, I think that's an excellent question, and I think that the thing is that's a more pressing question than people in our field appreciate for a couple of reasons. Like the thing is when there's low-hanging fruit and you have smart people attacking that low-hanging fruit, it goes like really quickly, like rapid progress can happen. But in our field, there often isn't low-hanging fruit. And so there's a little bit of a brain drain you could be worried about. But the problem is sometimes in our field, the senior faculty kind of think it's mostly a brain drain. It's like, oh, kids these days, they're not as, in our generation or whatever like that. And it's like, no, like we'd have to know everything that you know and then do something that impresses you that you haven't been doing right now to seem as good to you as like you guys were to the people before. So the thing is that as soon as you have a knowledge candidate that's getting a certain level of depth, because research is still set up so that it's still like you know everything that you know for the thing, it's very hard. So the best thing is to really have a good mentor to get you to the edge of the field and to not try to know more than you need to solve a problem. And I think that's not something that I appreciated because, especially for me, I got like this overhyped thing, this person's like this Einstein, whatever, and it's like, oh shoot, I need to really know this stuff. So I confronted myself with basically like, let me try to learn as much as I can. I was reading a bunch of like textbooks cover to cover, probably should have just been solving more problems because I'd at least have like more familiarity with it. But the main thing that I learned from that was just that I could point to different like chapters of textbooks and remember where things were when I needed it. And it's like very hard to really get a bigger picture. So like I think at the practical level, what I would tell a grad student coming now is that like it's scary when like someone who can interview you for like a popular science magazine somehow gets a better grasp of the big picture than you feel like you have after years of studying the thing. And it's because it's a different skill. And so you can go for like breadth with very, very minimal depth. First, to just see what you like. What do you like talking about to your grandma? And then you find that thing and find an expert in that field to do the depth and do the depth all the way up to the cutting edge because people won't appreciate it. They won't hire you unless you're adding something new. So the practical level, that's the practical advice. But I think the advice I would give to the senior people in our field is like you're asking a harder problem than you realize, which is that we're by adding to this knowledge canon, we're making it harder to process it. And so like we need to be more aware of that. And then also, it's also interesting when you have like an engineering discipline, most like complicated things do not have like one person who knows everything about it. It's fine to be modular. But because we're building these theoretical frameworks, we can't be modular at all in some sense, or at least when we are, it's seen as a faux pas. It's like really weird. So we're at a stage where we're not really as modular as we should be for like the capacity of really, like even the good researchers to be able to add something to this complicated system, because it really isn't a complicated system. It's supposed to be one simplified knowledge canon. But I think that this is something that we can try to like even just better like kind of maps of the field. Like Tufte would have a website telling you kind of guides of what books to read, and there's like lined out theoretical minimum. It's like we should accept the fact that we do expect some sort of baseline, be more open about it, and try to proactively like be like kind of assessing what the research trends are when we're giving people like advice on what to go into. Because the problem is you basically fall into whoever your advisor, what they know, what problems they have, and if people like it, that's great, and if they don't, you're screwed. And it's just like, this is not your fault. Yeah. And so I think that, but it's neat because there's only a couple thousand people who still have that brand rep, I think, for a little bit longer, hopefully, of like being these awesomely like smart, talented people. And like they're not doing things as effectively as they could, because I guess maybe there's some amount of pride of just pen and paper. I know everything that I do, but yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yes, all right.
You mentioned briefly the notion of semantic search.
Yeah.
Basically, just as I'm
Nice.
period, I'm like, how?
Yeah.
What do you see?
So I see a couple of things. I mean, so some of it, I mean, I'm not the expert in this thing. It's more for me. It's like as like the fundraising pitch type thing. So I want to be careful that I don't want to convey myself as a. But at a basic level, even like Semantic Scholar for like the Allen Institute is making better PDF readers. And so to what extent just a glossary for a paper, like seeing where the first time a symbol is defined in it, there's a little bit of that, which just like tossing it into some language model will give you like a guess of like the keywords there. And so at the level of just a single paper, there's some research workflow tech that you would hope that maybe, like, I mean, it's really funny that there's this niche of where we have funding from grants that could pay for tools that would make our like the data processing easier for us as people reading papers. But unless there's a charity that's willing to do it or like whatnot, there's no case for it to scale. Because something very bespoke would be very helpful to like the high energy theorists who have very standard formats for their papers. But for example, like LaTeX ML, like just taking a paper to HTML will run into problem if you have like the wrong LaTeX packages, right? So we're just very lucky that we all like copy and pasted from each other's like notebook, like whatever, like previous papers that were like it's relatively standardized. So there's a level of the same paper which I say like glossaries for paper, and then I think that the problem that we run into, which I try to talk to more experts on whether there's something there that actually would like turn around, but we are speaking different language, I would say, and it's a translation problem between like I guess to whatever extent, like the first step I would say is like mathematical like reverse equation search. So just literally seeing the same symbols in previous papers, like say, like I hate the fact we get scooped sometimes by results from whatever, like 20 years ago, and that shouldn't be a problem. Like there's Google that you can do literature search, but even just like reverse equation searching for papers would have done the step that like Sasha Debayatov and my advisor did, which is connecting memory effects to the soft theorems, because it's the same equation and momentum space almost looks the same structure of the equation. And so you could say that I could replace Sasha with a reverse equation search and the right like index of papers. So there's that. And then I think at a deeper level, it's literally the fact that it's this very bespoke translation problem, and that some of us don't know how to phrase our questions in the other person's language. That I think goes a little bit beyond the type of semantic search you would have as like a law student trying to find like some like prior example or case law, because there should be no ambiguity in the phrasing, versus we have like ambiguity beyond like just like trying to translate between equivalent languages. So I think that there's a level of abstraction there that's different, but that's just feeling it, right? But I would love to quantify that or understand a bit more, like how to speak to a machine learning person and not sound like I'm just. Yeah.
So there's something touched on, I think,
Yeah.
two answers here. The feeling that physics is becoming increasingly specialized.
Yes.
In our work.
Exactly.
People who do jargon, we have people who do low energy quantum gravity, people who do high energy quantum gravity, etc. And because of this, maybe we haven't had in the past decades any universal physicists, any Einstein or any Landau or anything like that. Do you think that's inevitable because physics becomes so hard that we need 10 years to understand even a small part of it? Do you think that is a problem? Yeah.
I think there's a part of me that wants to think it's inevitable so that I don't feel bad that I haven't done well, right? I mean, like, there's a part of you that's like, it's impossible. It's not like this hard, right? I mean, the same way that when I give a public talk and I try to explain my research, like, it's been reassuring to try to think, like, okay, so what does it mean to give a good, like, public level description? So I have to use only layman English, which I probably failed just because I'm not thinking in that language. But on top of that, I have to, like, have the concepts be also the common concepts that you'd use. And then if I try to say, well, I don't want to compromise accuracy, like, how long would it take me to use layman English, layman's version of that language to explain this concept, right? And that might be in a way that's like longer than the time I have for my talk, right? So I can say like, this is an impossible task. It's too complicated of an idea to convey accurately. And I care about accuracy because I'm a good scientist. And so all these people who are good at public speaking are like, that's why you don't like what they're doing, because it's not accurate, because it can't be. So I like to think that there's a part of it which is that the problem is getting harder. And then the thing that reassures me is that all of the people that I admire, like like only the kids these days even know Python, right? So like there's a level of just they wouldn't try to solve the problem by asking for help from other fields. Instead, they'll get upset, leave the field, go work for Google, and that's great. But like the thing is you could instead like either work for Google, get money or whatever, come back and as alumni help us actually solve these problems. So what I'm saying is I think that there are tools from other fields that we don't import because of the kind of the history of the way that our research works. And that obviously like people who are like just solving PDEs or like using numerical methods, there's more kind of cross pollination, I guess, between techniques because they need to compute these things. And for some reason, it's just mathematics for us. Like there's a level at which we're not solving problems in a way that would make it easier to have a larger impact. And I think it's a little bit of a sociology thing, and that we can fix that. And it'd be fun because you could do it as like a larger group, and our generation of physicists are going to like actually try to address this problem. So, yeah.
Amazing. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Just because you said about not talking to people from other disciplines, how much do you talk to applied physicists? Or like
Applied. I mean, it's like the definition of applied. I mean, if it's helping you with waveforms, it's kind of applied. No, it's not really. So I think that's the downside of being in a little theoretical physics bubble. But the upside is that everybody thinks what you're doing is awesome, right? Because I mean, like if you go to another department, they're like, "Well, you're doing formal string theory. Like, you can't measure it." Right? So you avoid the negative feedback in your bubble, but you don't always talk. So I think the best thing is that, I think I would be more likely to talk to. Maybe someone in a different discipline that would be useful for like the research workflow stuff than maybe a straight up applied physicist, just in my experience. So not super often unless they have cool like conference series, for example. Sometimes have some tabletop like theorists who are interested in what's like the cutting edge in tabletop experiments that will bring people through and whatnot. But I would say that it's not even just location. Like even when you're in a normal like group at a university that has those groups, you're not actually talking. Like you might run into each other like at a colloquium tea, but like, you're not having conversations where you're learning from each other. Because part of the problem is like you can't use each other's tools unless you understand what they're useful for. And so normally you need to know a little bit of both. And there's that.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone would like to?
How do you deal with failure?
I mean, I think it's a definition of failure. It's like you're always failing, or like you're still trying. I think the definition of failure is kind of the time scale at which you said that this thing had to be done or not, right? So I think the problem with our field is that we can also like say that there's this like infinite time scale where we're all like contributing to it. I'm lucky that I have like a faculty job, so at some level, like there's like that's a success versus a failure. Easy failure is not getting a job, right? And that's hard to see when you have talented people who just aren't lucky that on that job market, or there's some FOMO and one person gets all the offers. But I think that, yeah, I mean, definitely, it's not clearly like always an obvious failure. It's more of a slow burn of like things like the next like aha moment not coming fast enough. And that takes a toll on you, but probably not one that you fully appreciate unless you like try to be like retrospective about it. But yeah.
I think I have one more question.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of a big question. What improvements would you like to see in your field? Would that be a better gender balance or more interdisciplinary discussion? What do you see as necessary to improve your field, and where do you see the field going in the future?
So I'm happy. I think like perimeter, like the place that I work is a good place to be trying to be a part of this because exactly it cares about theoretical physics. So if I want to care about my field, I think the first thing we got to do is realize that we're a field of a couple thousand people. We know who each other are. In some sense, you can even just go and Inspire, happen and find like the data people. So I think that we should basically, instead of thinking about every time there's an opportunity where somebody donated to like a research center or a new like grant schema, we take initiative or action on that. Like, to what extent we know that if they want to fund these ideas, our employer is in some sense each other, even though it's not literally, it's coming from different things. So I think more organization in the field will help solve a few problems. One of them is like whatever funding issues or distributions of resources, as far as like if you like the kind of lore is that if you have an academic job, you've made it, even though depending on what university you're at, you either can have postdocs or not. You have someone who can help you write grants or not. So there's some things where maybe like we can help each other there. And then also once you recognize like that kind of field structure as opposed to like your academic institution, you can care about the pipeline entering it, right? And you can also care about like what are the things people are actually working on rather than what are you working on, or like what are people working on now that I might hire. So you care about a different set of things. And so I think just, I guess, taking ownership of the fact that we still have that valuable brand, using that to kind of create some structure. They're not trying to compete with universities, but in addition to it, that really is cross-section academia by that field. And it's supporting that can then also, I think, lead to what I think will be more, maybe not breakthroughs per se, but increasing the odds of it. Because once you have that infrastructure, you can start to say, well, like what would really make a research better or easier to do? Like maybe it's like hiring some people who are machine learning experts or whatnot, to make more bespoke versions of things that like industry will build. And so you can ask those questions only when you have like someone who can commission that, right? So I think that that's the future, is basically like recognizing that we're part of this awesome legacy, valuing that, even if like some of us, it's like the odds are if someone is successful, that's great, rather than just individually, and then trying to support that and think about how do we make it easier to do what we're doing and ask for that. So
amazing. Yeah. Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
But with regards to the gender imbalance.
Yeah.
How soon do you see that improving to a much better standard then?
I mean, I think I see it improving, like, when the conditions are improving in some sense. Like, I mean, it would be super cool to really be able to say, like, for my personal story, to pivot, like, this kind of arc of, like, who's the next Einstein type stuff to we are as a group, and then, like, why, like, those opportunities should be something that we can take advantage of in some sense. Like, we're definitely not using that brand while we still have it. And then I think that if there are success stories in that sense, like if we can get, like for even like a two-body problem with physicists. So like say you have a partner who's at a different institution, like people will literally choose worse institutions, right, to be with their partners. But if you think about it, if I was really employed by my field, perhaps there can be like some number of postdocs that are like from that field, right? So basically, if the field is hiring you, that's who you're working for. It doesn't matter where you're working. So there's certain logistical issues that I think will actually help with gender balance if you have that type of structure. But I think that the timescales for which those things change are timescales where you really have the data or the means to change them. And I think that, like, so I'm worried about that. I think that structure can be there much sooner than maybe the impact. But I think, you know, I do think that we can have a positive change, and that the people who want to be in our field won't have the reasons to leave. Because they're important. They're like, basically, we should see physicists, and the same reason for like promoting like gender equality or whatnot is that you have people who could be doing work for you, right? Like you have talent, and I think we don't always view our colleagues as talent because we view them as like someone who's trying to get a job instead of us, or they might win a prize instead of us. But like if you see it like, no, this is our field, and if our field doesn't do something cool, we're gonna all be screwed. And so we want to recruit talent, but we don't have a mechanism to really view that as the field. And so I want to help people create that, so that then that argument becomes really important. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Can we all give Dr. Sabrina a big